We're going to keep it simple today. I'm going to give you 3 tips that will instantly help you level up your church graphic design and your visual communication skills, and it won't cost you a dime. Let's dive in. Look, if you've been designing graphics for your church in any respect for any amount of time, whether you're brand new or you've been doing this for a long time, we all need a little bit of help sometimes. There's always that graphic that you've just been staring at for way too long. You don't know what's wrong with it. And I sure know that I needed help when I was starting it. So here's 3 design principles that will immediately make your graphics better if you start to apply them today. Now, the thing about design rules is you can always break them, and you should look to break them when it makes sense. But what I learned as a new designer 10 years ago was design rules are there for a reason. You have to use them to learn when to break them in the first place. So you can take these with a grain of salt if you want, but I really do believe that if you start using these 3 techniques, it will make your graphics better right away. And to show you these rules, I'm going to take a look at some of my graphics from a while ago and some of my graphics from more recently when I feel like I've started to learn from these rules and when to break these rules. So let's dive in together today. Here's my first tip. Focus on creating a hierarchy of information. Here's what I mean by this. You can use composition, color, contrast. The goal of using those is to create a hierarchy of information or a journey for the person who is viewing your graphic. The difference between like a piece of art and a graphic that's meant to communicate information, especially something that we're doing for the church, there's this fine balance in that space where good communication takes a viewer on a journey. It's going to take them from point A to point B so that at the end of their journey, they leave having gained information or gained inspiration, whichever the goal of what you're trying to do is making. Now, if the journey for them is confusing, they may not come away from viewing your graphic with the information, the inspiration that you want them to come through. So take a look at this. So here's an example. This is a graphic that I made. It looks like it was before 2020. So this was 5 years ago. I think I've gotten a little better since then. Now, on the face of it, there's not a lot of information in this graphic, but it actually is a little confusing the way that you should be reading it. Now, there's a logo here. There is a title that looks a little overcomplicated to me the way that I'm looking at it now. There's a name in the back, and then there's fall 2020. Now, you'll see in a lot of my more recent graphics, I don't include church logos. I don't always include like a calendar bit of information in a sermon graphic. With a sermon graphic, I'm looking to equally inspire and inform. Like a pastor is trying to communicate biblical truth in a local context week in and week out, and so we want to have something that helps visually to do that and helps cement that message in a congregation's mind. This looks cool, but for me, it's busy. And it classifies as busy because it is not communicating information with the appropriate hierarchy. Typical graphic designer guy, not even defining his terms, acting as if everybody already knows what visual hierarchy is. Just use visual hierarchy, right? Just use visual hierarchy. Visual hierarchy is a design principle that organizes and arranges elements to guide a viewer's eye through content in an order of importance, helping them to understand and navigate information more effectively. When you look at this graphic, what do you think the name of the series is? Well, the only thing that's telling you is this colon all the way here on the right side. The title is actually Moses, God in Our Journey. But when you first look at this graphic, all of the red, which is highly contrasted to the black and white background, is immediately drawing your eyes to God in Our Journey. Now, that's okay if your pastor that you're talking with is trying to communicate that the title is God in Our Journey, but the title of the series is Moses, and Moses is completely in the background. It's big, it looks good. Like, it's not that the techniques that I used in this graphic are bad techniques, although I don't usually do this like kind of off stroke thing anymore. That's just something I've grown out of. But the contrast that's created by the color red on all of this black and white draws your eyes to the wrong information first. And that's bad. Visual hierarchy. In the same way, because we read left to right, you're actually seeing the church title. Here's the thing. You're already in the church if you're seeing this graphic. This is only being used on Sunday morning, or you're seeing it on a website as a thumbnail for listening to the sermon. So the fact that the top left is the church logo provides no new information and therefore is of no worth to a viewer. So if I was to go back and do this graphic again, I would focus on what the actual title is. I would clarify with the pastor, hey, do you want them to see Moses, God in our journey? Or is Moses just kind of the add-on and the title is God in our journey? This graphic screams God in our journey. And then, oh, there's Moses in the background. That's cool. My job as a graphic designer is to help pastors communicate as clearly as possible visually. And I don't think I achieved that with this graphic. And that comes down to not having a clear user journey, not having a clear hierarchy of information. Visual hierarchy. If you focus on how is the contrast, the composition, and the color of this image, what is the order in which the audience is gaining information? Think about that. That's something that doesn't cost you any money to think about that. I did this graphic a year or so later. I think this has much better hierarchy of information. What is the series title? God Knows What We Need. It's really easy to see. In fact, the white stands out against all of the soft greens and beiges and browns in the color. You read the title and then you read what is the series about, 1 Samuel 8. I think this might have been a one-off. And then as you start to open up and see what's in the background, you're actually given imagery that reinforces the title. This idea of we are the sheep in his pasture, the Psalms say. God takes care of us as a shepherd takes care of the sheep. He knows what we need. Or you think of 1 Samuel 8, which I think was talking about David. David was a shepherd, right? The imagery is reinforcing what you saw first in the title because there's such a clear visual hierarchy. Visual hierarchy. You see the title name, God Knows What We Need. You see the subtitle, 1 Samuel 8, and then you see the imagery that's in the graphic supporting everything else. I think that's a better example of visual hierarchy than the first graphic that I showed you. Visual. Now, this second graphic also shows the second tip I want to show you, which is font pairing. When in doubt, use only 2 fonts and focus how they work together to communicate information. When you use more than 2 fonts, it muddies up your visual hierarchy, yes, but it starts to blend styles in a way that gets confusing and might not communicate the information they're trying to communicate clearly enough. With this, I've got a serif style font and a sans serif style font. I think that's usually one of the best ways to do font pairing. You can also do like different weight. When you're doing like a lot of text, it's really good to have like a bold header, but then to have like a regular style text underneath it because it gives you a lot of readability over time. When you take the time to match 2 fonts, you have a very strong, clear way of communicating information. I like to do this as well. This is a graphic that I made for a client this year. This is for a men's group that was meeting. They wanted something that was going to be very bold and very eye-grabbing to attract men to come to this event. And notice there's 2 fonts. There's this big, bold, kind of stylized sans serif display font. But then there's also a mono font here at the bottom, just giving a little bit of extra texture. When I do extra text that is very small, that is not going to be intentionally read to communicate information, I call that texture text. And so this texture text is not actually important. This hashtag is not really probably going to be used by men, but it makes the graphic feel a little bit less empty. When in this case, if I had just had the lion and the title, it would have felt a little unfinished. There's ways that I add polish to designs that just have a little bit more pro touch. Sometimes that's a little bit of small text, or like these icons here in the top right of this image, which kind of give you this sense of networking, of home, of kind of being sent, which is something that the client wanted to communicate in the graphic. The third tip, and what might be the most obvious duh kind of tip, but a good reminder that I have to give myself all of the time, is this: when in doubt, simplify. Now, I think we're starting to see a good little renaissance of maximalism in a way that I'll show you some examples of when I break this rule of simplify, but in a way that you might not necessarily be thinking about. But sometimes the simplest choice is the best choice. It's the clearest way to communicate. This series is Habakkuk. Nothing else about it. We got the colors. This looked great on scenic for this church because it gave them colors that they could work with their lighting and with their scenic. There's actually just 2 icons and a title. You have a scroll, which symbolizes prophecy. You have scales, which symbolize justice, which are the things that Habakkuk is talking about in his book. A big, bold title. It shows up on any screen super well. I've just constantly had to remind myself that simplifying is usually going to be a better end result, because the point of like a sermon graphic, like I said, you're balancing information and inspiration. What you're doing is communicating, and clear communication always wins. When it comes to breaking these rules, I break them all the time. Take a look at this graphic. This is a graphic that I made for a pastor, an itinerant pastor who's preaching in a lot of different locations, and the title was Looking Forward to Things to Come. Now, when we were talking about what style we wanted to work in, it was a very modern style. There's a couple different pieces here. You have this photo, which was actually AI generated, and then it looks like it's kind of in like a plastic wrap because of the texture work that I did. But I did 3 different fonts, actually. There's this big, bold sans serif, there's a serif font, and then there's also a mono font here at the bottom. Now, what I mentioned before about textural text, things that aren't really meant to be the most important information, something that's just an add-on to kind of make it that little pro level, a little bit more full feeling. This text has a low enough contrast that you're not seeing it first. You're keeping good visual hierarchy, even though I've broken another one of these rules. Visual hierarchy. The color is drawing your eye to forward, even though this text is darker and doesn't match the rest of this. It's in a word, the word forward is already communicating what the pastor wanted to communicate in his message. And then you get the full picture when you read the full title, Looking Forward to Things to Come. And then you see a little bit more extra information if you so desire. In a glance, the audience is already seeing what they need to see. They see the looking forward to things to come and the imagery supporting it. This is one of my favorite title graphics that I ever made for a church. This was for my home church, Rock Point. For the summer of 2024, we were just talking about the book of Proverbs, and our pastors kept drawing in how the Proverbs are echoing the original story of the garden, and how the tree of the knowledge of good and bad is an image of wisdom. And so I created this graphic. It's just mostly textures and then this CG tree that I was able to source. You could argue that I break the rule of simplicity here because there's a lot going on. There's 3 different kinds of fonts here. There is this big bold display sans serif. There is a serif font here. There's a different sans serif for this information, as well as I think this is the same font as this. I think that's Humane from Rajesh Rajput. There is a clear hierarchy of information, and because of that, I could break the rules and make it a little bit more interesting, have a little more involved in it. But the colors are drawing your eyes first to what's important. Proverbs, wisdom on mission. Now, this text probably could have been smaller in the long run, but this was something that our pastor also wanted us to include. The point is, as long as you're focusing on clear communication, there are rules that you can break, but you learn when you can break the rules by first following the rules, by learning them, by sticking to them. So when you're just starting out in graphic design, I would emphasize learn good composition and good contrast and good color so that you are focusing on communicating clearly. The more that you prove you are able to communicate clearly, the more you're able to start taking liberties and develop your own style. But then there's also situations where you just completely throw the rules out the window, like this example. So for this graphic for a church in Oklahoma, for their youth group, there is a style that's going around for churches, for youth groups, called brutalism. That is, it's just maximum. It's just put everything into it. This is something that I would not normally do for a Sunday morning church in most cases, where it feels just like kind of grungy and has all these different elements and the text is changing constantly. This is communicating a feeling, not communicating as much information. What this is going to be is it's just going to be on the screen on this big LED wall during youth gatherings. It's not trying to communicate information. It actually is communicating inspiration over information, which means that I can break all of those rules that I talked about earlier and have multiple different kinds of fonts, have a lot of different color, have a lot of different elements. And it actually is still good visual hierarchy in the end, which I think is kind of the most important of these tools that I'm teaching you today. Visual hierarchy. Ultimately, what you're trying to do as a graphic designer is to communicate somebody else's mission as clearly and compellingly as possible. And so you're going to be able to develop your own style over time. The good news is there are people who have gone before you who have learned how to do clear visual communication before you, and you can learn from them and then develop your own style and learn when it's right to break those rules so that you can communicate what you're trying to communicate and what your pastor is trying to communicate even clearer than you could have before. I hope these examples have been helpful to you, and if you would like to see anything else specifically, you have any questions, let me know down in the comments. Hey, thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope it was helpful to you. If you think that it might be helpful for someone in your church, I'd love to hear that you sent it to them. And you can let me know in the comments what kind of content you're looking to see. But for now, like, subscribe, comment, and I will see you in the next video.